Well, a Security Council meeting behind closed doors in New York on this very subject has just been concluded. But just as those council members were about to convene, some fiery language from Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan directed at those criticizing the operation. This is what he had to say earlier today.
Ey Avrupa Birliği, kendinize gelin.
Hey, European Union, pull yourself together. I say it again, if you try to label this operation as an invasion, it's very simple. We will open the gates and send 3.6 million refugees your way.
Kapıları açarız. 3,6 milyon mülteciyi sizlere göndeririz. Saudi Arabistan aynaya baksın. Yemen'i bu hale
Saudi Arabia should look into the mirror. Who brought Yemen to this state? Look at its current condition. Did tens of thousands of people not die in Yemen? Hey, Saudi Arabia, give account for this first.
Ey Suudi Arabistan, siz önce bunun hesabını verin.
You can't comment on our move for the unity and solidarity of Syria. Egypt, you can't talk at all. You're a country with a democracy killer.
Katili olan bir kişisin.
Our correspondent at the United Nations, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, joins us now from New York. Very good day to you, Sherwin. Council members would have been well aware of President Erdogan's words. Was there any reaction?
Well, the Turkish president essentially throwing down the gauntlet here in terms of international criticism against this military offensive across the border in northeastern Syria into what is essentially a territory controlled by Kurdish forces in that region, and essentially deploying a tactic that, the pot calling the kettle black, if you will, that no one is without blame in terms of various geopolitical concerns in the world, whether you're talking about Saudi Arabia vis-a-vis Yemen, whether you're talking about the way some European countries have treated refugees, and so forth. Egypt, for example, with sort of dictatorial tendencies, referencing that. So we were very expectant that EU members in particular, given his pointed remarks on sending refugees, some 3.6 million, into Europe, that the EU delegates in the Security Council would sort of come back with a forceful rebuttal. They've just issued, Nzinga, a very temperate statement, basically expressing deep concern at the Turkish military operation in northeast Syria, that unilateral military action on Turkey threatens to undermine the progress that has been made in Syria. Of course, just a couple of days ago, the Secretary General of the United Nations, during the high-level meeting here of the General Assembly, announced the formation of a constitutional committee in Syria, 150 members that are basically going to start renegotiating and taking the peace process forward. And a big concern from EU member states that this is now going to undermine the bigger picture in terms of moving Syria towards constitutional reform and then elections. But breaking away from his EU colleagues, the German deputy ambassador had more pointed language criticizing this invasion. Let's listen to what the deputy permanent representative of Germany had to say, and then at the back of that also what the Russian ambassador had to say.
He condemns the Turkish unilateral military operation in northeastern Syria in the strongest possible terms. We fear that this operation runs the risk of further destabilizing the entire region and also re-strengthening the Islamic State. Syria has now been severely impacted by this terrible war for 8 years, and we are now at the verge of starting a political process with the Constitutional Committee. This is what we need. We need a political process. However, the Turkish operation now threatens to unleash another humanitarian catastrophe, as well as new refugee movements. We therefore call on Turkey to cease its operation and to pursue its security interests in a peaceful manner.
We were calling upon Turkey and Syria to engage in a dialogue in accordance with the Adana Agreement of 1998. And it's regrettable that it was not done. I think that's the best way. The best way is to engage in a direct dialogue by whoever. We're encouraging the Kurds to engage in direct dialogue with the Syrian government, but as you know, they preferred other protectors, and you see what's happening now.
So clear indication there from the Russian ambassador that consensus around this issue, how to respond to this military offensive in the absence of the United States. Of course, the US withdrawing their troops from that region is going to be a difficult exercise, Nzinga.
Sherwin, given that this military operation started after the withdrawal of US forces from the region, who are providing a buffer between Turkey and the Kurds, who have been American allies in this fight against ISIS, what's the United States saying about those latest developments?
Well, a lot of criticism being directed from within the Republican Party against this Republican president's decision to withdraw those troops. The background here is that the United States and Kurdish forces in that region were fighting hand in hand against ISIS fighters in that region. The Kurds have been a very strong and consistent ally to U.S. forces. So domestic lawmakers were very surprised at this unilateral decision by the President of the United States that went against some of the advice from military generals, from the Defense Department, and we understand from officials in the State Department. But U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Kelly Craft, also spoke to us shortly after that Security Council meeting.
As the President has made abundantly clear, the U.S. has not in any way endorsed the decision of the government of Turkey to mount a military incursion into northeast Syria. President Trump has emphasized to the government of Turkey that they bear full responsibility for protecting the Kurdish population and religious minorities, including Christians, and ensuring that no humanitarian crisis takes place. In addition, Turkey is now responsible for ensuring that all ISIS fighters in detention in prison remain in prison, and that ISIS does not reconstitute itself in any way, shape, or form. Failure to play by the rules to protect vulnerable populations, failure to guarantee that ISIS cannot exploit these actions to reconstitute, will have consequences.
So essentially, the United States speaking a bit here with a forked tongue. Yes, President Trump agreeing with President Erdogan that he will remove U.S. forces from that region, forces that were offering air support to Kurdish fighters against ISIS. But in addition to that, saying, while we understand that you want to go in there, and under the pretext of the Turkish, certainly the Turkish narrative is that they're fighting terrorism in the region. They are saying if you go too far, there will be economic consequences. Trump, of course, tweeting earlier that they would obliterate the Turkish economy if they were to violate international human rights law, particularly against civilians in that region. So a very complex situation there. It's unclear how the United States is going to be monitoring exactly what Turkish forces are doing in that region, given their withdrawal from it.
So, Sherwin, what's the role of the Council moving forward, given the history of what some would say is the failure on the Syrian issue?
Well, the Council does a lot of talking, doesn't it, Nzinga? And we don't often get a product, particularly on certain files in this Council, whether you're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the situation in Western Sahara, or the situation in Syria, whether you're talking about issues and concerns from aid agencies as it pertains to humanitarian access, or whether you're talking about the chemical weapons use that certain countries have accused the Syrian government of deploying in certain parts of Syria. There has been no Security Council product due to vetoes employed by Russia. So this is a very complex situation. It speaks to the need for Security Council reform, and it's difficult for us to sort of see a path for the Council here. It's going to, I think, depend on countries in the region. You heard Turkey's president talk about Egypt, Saudi Arabia. They are voicing their concerns. We've heard from the Europeans. But in terms of consensus in the Council, it's difficult to see how that happens in the absence of the much vaunted, or certainly touted reform that is so much desired by many countries around the world.
SABC correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease giving us some insight into those issues there. Thanks so much for your time this evening.